I believe that solar, renewable energy is the way to go.
To enable high integration of PV and wind, we need storage to fill in the gaps.
We have all the solutions in hand. We only have to implement it.
Some of the growth that you're seeing, especially in the ESS space, is really cutting edge, and some of the technology which we're seeing here is phenomenal.
Because I'm from Shenzhen, is one of the top cities in China. I think almost 60 to 70% of the vehicles you can see on the streets is electric vehicles.
Hello and welcome to the sixth and final episode of Powering Through the Resilience of Renewables, a feature series of the Smarter E podcast. My name's Jonathan Gifford. I'm your host and the head of content at Climate Copy. And over the last few months, it's really been a great pleasure to research, record, edit and then publish the 5 episodes that have made up the series thus far, where we've been investigating how to build a resilient energy transition. And we've had a really excellent collection of guests, a very high caliber of guests, actually from 5 different continents, which reflects the international nature of the global energy transition community and industries, and also the international nature of events such as the Smarter E Europe, which attracted over 100,000 attendees from right around the world in 2025. And while, as I said, the caliber of the guests was really excellent, as were their insights, we also wanted to highlight and feature some of the perspectives, experiences, analysis, and takeaways from attendees of the Smarter E Europe trade show themselves. So we hit the trade show floor, and I'm happy to bring some of those voices, some of those opinions to this episode today. In terms of themes, we've really tried to dig into the major themes, the hot button topics that were central to discussions at the Smarter E Europe 2025 in Munich. And of course, battery energy storage was absolutely central to that. EVs, e-mobility was also. And another interesting trend was how solar and energy storage can not only deliver clean electrons, but how they're also able to provide affordable, reliable, and also how they were able to provide affordable and reliable electricity generation, but also very quickly to meet rising electricity demand, whether that's from businesses because of electrification, homes with things like electric heating and e-mobility, but also huge power demand sources such as data centers powering the new wave of AI development. But first, let's hit the trade show floor. We're going to hear from one attendee from Ghana, first of all, and then 2 of our podcast guests, Abigail Ross Hopper from the Solar Energy Industries Association in the United States, and Jenny Chase from Bloomberg NEF. So I hope you enjoy this first section of episode 6 of Powering Through.
We manage accounts and have clients back home who depend, to a large extent on electricity. And you realize that because of power fluctuations, they're not able to operate smoothly as they would like to. So I believe that solar, renewable energy is the way to go. And with the knowledge and insight I have gathered from this conference, I'm happy to go back home, sit together with my team, put together like a package that would suit their businesses. I've seen some inverters that could actually power a whole bank, for example, and some of our clients are banks, and we're happy to go sell those services to them. And I believe that once they subscribe, their business will take a different turn.
Rising electricity demand, and how are we going to meet that demand? And in the United States, it's with solar and storage. It's the fastest way that we can do that. And that narrative and that reality also brings some stability to the policy, because it is a market force that is driving the conversation, as opposed to sort of a a technology choice or like a climate decision. It's like, you know, if you, United States, if you want to continue to maintain be at the forefront of the AI dominance, which is what our president says, you have to provide reliable, stable electricity. In order to do that, you have to figure out the cheapest, fastest, and that's solar and storage. So it's a little bit of a different take on your question, but I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle.
These days, solar panels are freaking everywhere. Seriously, you look at Google Earth and at some random area of Pakistan and you see solar panels everywhere. And this is causing challenges as well as huge opportunities. And so the next step is to figure out how to integrate that into grids and to figure out how to make sure that the batteries that we've got in the grid play nicely with the grids. So I think that we've got to build batteries and we've got to make sure that they are charging when there's lots of sun and discharging when it is the best to support the grid, which a lot of electricity pricing regimes in Europe don't do at the moment. You know, a lot of electricity pricing regimes are flat or have cheaper power at night, and that's not necessarily what our new energy transition ready grid wants them to be doing. So I would say something like subsidies, capex subsidies for batteries, that's what gets them built, and then quite flexible electricity pricing to make sure that those batteries have an incentive to charge and discharge at the best times. I was quite encouraged to go to the UK and see adverts for Octopus Energy, which has a really flexible power pricing regime everywhere. It was quite weird to see my job everywhere, but it's definitely making an impact on the average UK person.
Right throughout our Powering Through series, battery energy storage systems were a major topic of discussion. And the reason is that in Europe, as in many parts of the world, to continue to add solar energy capacity to our electricity networks, we're going to have to bolster that with energy storage and flexibility. So that's the topic of this second part of episode 6 of Powering Through. In fact, we recorded the series in the first week of May, just days after the Iberian blackout on the peninsula on April 28. So needless to say, that was a major topic of discussion, and our podcast guests were able to provide considerable insights into this topic. So first, let's hear from two attendees of the Smarter Europe 2025 down on the trade show floor, and then two of our experts who took part in the podcast series, Julian Jansen from Fluence and Michael Schreiber from Octopus Energy.
I mean, you can see it on the fair itself. It started as a solar PV fair, and now I would say about half the content at the fair is energy storage. And yeah, to enable high integration of PV and wind, we need storage to fill in the gaps. Just look at what happened in the Iberian Peninsula. Storage couldn't, entirely prevented that, but it would have been a big help if there was more storage integrated.
I think especially after the Spanish issue, but I'm quite confident because we see a lot of battery solutions there. We know technology-wise the battery is the solution. You need only a bit more electronic and then you are ready for primary, and in milliseconds you have everything. So I think this is the next step, and this is always my answer. I think we have all the solutions in hand, we only have to implement it. I think the issue is probably, is there a cannibalization effect in the next few years? So I think the hot wave is now, and I think for the next 2, 3, 4 years, simple. And you get bank to finance it. This is the interesting thing.
But I think what's a clear fact is that energy storage as part of a wider mix of energy technologies in the system can play a critical role in providing grid stability and increasing security of the grid. And if we think about the Spanish context, today there's only around 200 megawatt of battery energy storage installed in Spain. So a very, very, very small number. There's a larger fleet of pumped hydro energy storage, but pumped hydro has a different role to play, particularly around temporal shifting of electricity. So when we think about battery energy storage, even though there's a 12 gigawatt target number by the government for 2030, we're a long way from achieving that. When we think about battery energy storage, and that comes to your question around the blackout, it's not just about the temporal aspect of time shifting electricity, but critically, storage has two other roles to play. One is resource adequacy, so basically providing backup to the grid. The other one is grid stability. And this is often overlooked because for advanced applications and advanced controls, energy storage can provide grid forming capability, synthetic inertia, so mimicking the rotating masses that we are taking offline as we are decommissioning fossil-based generation, but also provide black start capability and voltage control, so also able to bring the grid back much quicker. So while I wouldn't say the blackout wouldn't have happened because of with energy storage, it's also clear the more energy storage we have in the system, the more resiliency we have and the more ability we have to limit blackouts and to bring the grid back up in a more quicker and effective way.
But just building storage is not enough. I think we also need to change frameworks because like frequency containment reserve most likely would not have solved what we have seen. And we need incentives like for, as you said, synthetic inertia. And yeah, we don't know what has happened, but during that time we had 70% renewable generation and we have this little storage. So yeah, most likely this has a strong influence and we will find out.
Of course, the heritage of the Smarter E Europe is into solar, and key to that is solar PV. It remains the building block of our industry and one of the major driving forces of action on climate change and the global energy transition. But there are many challenges facing solar rollout, and of course that was a major topic of discussion at the Smarter E 2025. One of the takeaways was that to continue to accelerate solar deployment, there will be energy storage, as we've already seen, required, but also market reforms and more flexibility in all shapes and sizes. So let's hear from a European Smarter E attendee about some of the challenges facing large-scale solar construction in Europe, and Valborga Hemmetsberger, who is the CEO of Solar Power Europe, who again points to the role of flexibility and energy storage as key enablers for ongoing solar deployment.
Solar business have is big potential because everybody understand its next generation will be working only solar energy. This is solar, wind is it's good renewable energy. It's not coal, it's oil. This is I think is less time. It's my business. Construction is PV parks. This is a PV park. We have a little bit problem for land, problem for government regulation. We have problem is close is border. You know, I think it's in future this is will be change.
We still need to go faster. So even if we see it on many roofs today, we still need to, be at 70, 80 gigawatt of additional capacity every year now, going forward to reach the 750 gigawatt that we promised European policymakers to install by 2030. And indeed, battery will be helping. I very much agree with you that we need to look at the incentive structure. What we do see is that, for example, time of use tariffs are greatly helping, but we only see that in a couple of countries by now. So we have like 11 countries, I think that's the latest figures that ASA published, 11 countries that have time of use tariffs for TSO and the DSO level, 8 countries for the DSO level. So we need to see that everywhere. And I couldn't agree more with the funding that will help, obviously, CapEx funding. We saw the storage market going through the roof in Italy with the schemes that they had in the last couple of years. So this is what we need to see a little bit everywhere in order to add the flexibility with storage that we need in the system.
How to foster a battery industry and battery production was also a major topic of discussion during Powering Through. And there's this general sense that geopolitically and also for local economies, it would be far better to have battery manufacturing more diverse, more dispersed in places like Europe, in the United States, and in emerging energy transition manufacturing hubs like India. But how can you achieve this? Well, what's clear is it's certainly not going to be easy. Battery manufacturing is very complex, as was reflected by some of our experts on the Powering Through podcast. But first, let's hear from an American show attendee on the trade show floor, along with Josephine Berg from S&P Global and Ivan Saha from India's Reliance Infrastructure, who both spoke about the complexity and technical challenges in battery manufacturing, but also the vast opportunity.
I think it's fantastic. Some of the growth that you're seeing, especially in the ESS space, is really cutting edge, and some of the technology which we're seeing here is phenomenal. Especially with the collaboration in Asia, there's been a lot of really great talks about how you can bring more technology to Europe and have a more circular supply chain, which I thought was really interesting. Europe is already leading on the cutting edge of renewables, and where you need energy storage is with those renewables. If the wind isn't blowing, if you've got a cloudy day, you're not necessarily capturing as much energy, and so pushing policy for solar, like you're seeing at this conference, pushing policy for renewables leads to this chain reaction where you're going and seeing more growth in energy storage. You're going and seeing more jobs from actually building these plants locally so that you can go and compete with cost with places like China.
It's a whole other different level of complexity. And I think you could probably speak more on the technical side, but just all the risks that you have to manage, the performance of the batteries, the supply chain, everything is more complex, and that's what makes it more difficult. To be crass, like you can have module assembly plants set up pretty quickly in a lot of parts of the world. But to do batteries, you need to think it through, and you need to get to that scale again in order to be competitive.
The complexity of battery is much higher. The reason is the changes of chemistry, the technological. The moving parts are far too many as compared to solar. Chemistry, making the cell itself, making it reliable, and with the right features, with the right cell, with the right lifetime, etc. It's incredibly complex. It's not as simple, but then as solar. But at that, then everything goes through a life cycle. I think what battery manufacturing today all over the world is what solar was 15 years back. It's the scale and the investment and number of players that get into it more and more. I think everything is going to fall in place. And going forward, it will be battery and solar, which will be the king of renewables, I would say.
Growth of battery energy storage and e-mobility, EVs, really do go hand in glove. Whether EVs are themselves supporting battery manufacturers, or that battery manufacturers and battery technology is enabling the EV rollout. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, but what is clear, as the two of them grow, they grow together. This was a major theme at the Smarter E Europe 2025. And it's really interesting to see how EVs are going to interrelate with clean energy technologies like solar and wind generation sources, but also with the electricity network, with concepts like vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. And one thing is clear, it's going to require a new way of thinking about mobility, about energy, and about concepts like flexibility. We have one attendee featured on this section from Shenzhen, China, and he gives us his perspective from this very dynamic e-mobility hotspot. Along with that, we'll hear from Adele Zhao from Trina Solar, Thomas Raffiner from the Mobility House, and the Redefining Energy podcast host, Jared Reed, all delivering their takes on how EVs, solar, and energy storage are changing the energy game.
Because when you get the electricity from the solar panel, sometimes you don't need the electricity now, so you would like to store it in a storage system. And then when you need it, you can drove it out. So you need to control, of course. Because I'm from Shenzhen, it's one of the top cities in China. I think almost 60 to 70% of the vehicles you can see on the streets is electric vehicles.
I actually checked some number, quite interesting. I'm pretty sure many of you already know, but I will be also to highlight, it's very interesting. I will go to the battery, how much actually were shipped last year in China, of course, to the global. So in total is 1,175 gigawatt hour. So the battery as a whole, everything. Of course, there are many segments on it. Of course, again, EV is the leading one. And out of that, it's 780 is for EV. And so it's a quite amazing number. And then the second is already also energy storage, right? But EV alone is really, really impressive. I'm from China. I just told Jonathan, I just went back to China during Chinese New Year. The EV just so impressive, the car, not just the price, everything inside, it's really impressive, right? So globally, we sold, so every country we sold about 180 million actually car EV last year. And also, so it's about 24.4% growth globally. But China alone, we sold 12 million cars alone. So actually, a lot of my friends are driving EV. So for like mid-class family, they can all afford it. It's really like something for everyone almost. So that's really impressive. And also the infrastructure is also there. So that's very, very great, I think, movement on the EV side.
Now, I have to say, if you look around, there are electric cars, for some too many, for some too little, and there are fortunately tons of renewables. And now is the time to bring this thing together. And fortunately, we've been in Berlin yesterday. People see now electric cars as part of the solution and not part of the problem. I think this is really the major mind shift that has been done. And fortunately, we have a government now in Germany, and fortunately, they see what we do. And fortunately, now I think this can start. And this will be a line in the future, I'm sure, and it will be very steep. And I mean, if you don't do it intelligently, if you don't do it right, it will collapse. We have seen that in Spain. We have seen that in many incidents. If you do it right, the cars can help to stabilize the grid. If you get it wrong, it might cause a problem. But if you do it right, this will be the biggest flexibility that we have. Even today, we have 1.5 million cars. That equal 15 nuclear power stations. That's a lot to stabilize the grid. And they're here, they're connected, so you can do a lot with it.
I think the thing that I would add is, I know Thomas quite a while, so we're what I would describe as non-linear thinkers. And the issue I would say as a European is that our leaders are all linear thinkers. And we're now living in a non-linear world where it's very difficult. You can't get McKinsey to just tell you what's going to happen because they're going to be wrong. And we've lived in this linear world, if I may say, since German reunification. And that would be my concern as a European, is that we need more Thomases in leadership positions that actually, think innovatively and get things done quickly. And that's what you do in China.
And to round out this final section of the final episode of Powering Through, we really wanted to focus on technology, because while the mission may be decisive action on climate change, the way we're going to get there is through technology. More efficient, cheaper, easier to deploy. This is going to define the progress that we make. And of course, technology development is defined by R&D, research and development, those research institutes and universities that make the breakthroughs, both the fundamental research and the applied research that really pushes technology forward. And we're going to hear from a giant of the solar research community, Martin Green from the UNSW, who's often referred to as the father of photovoltaics, and a young researcher, Iwona Kafedziska, who recently joined the ETIPPV, the European Technology and Innovation Platform for Photovoltaics.
Yeah, so I've got sort of a bit of a mixed attitude to IP. So, initially when I'm a young researcher, I thought, well, I don't want to make any money from any results of my research. I won't worry about patenting anything. But when we started talking to companies and trying to get them involved in our research, we realized we had to have patents for them to take it seriously. So sort of changed my attitude to it. So we licensed one of our technologies to BP Solar, and they used it we licensed them in 85, and they used it up to 2006, so when they dropped out of manufacturing. That was their Saturn product, and that's been our biggest commercial licensing success. But the other technology we're well known for is the PERC technology. That's just an acronym for the type of cell. Won't have time to go into details about it, but the patents on that had all expired by the time the industry got round to using it, which I think was one of the reasons that the industry adopted it so broadly and quickly. And there weren't any intellectual property barriers in relation to it. The industry is now using TopCon, and we made our first TopCon. So, that was the one that I didn't patent back in, I think it was 1972, when we showed that you could get high voltage from these tunneling types of structures. But that's where all the litigation's over. And it's actually a bit of a shame, I think, because, some of the companies claim to have like hundreds or even thousands of patents on TopCon. So, hey, you can have hundreds or thousands of, bewildering, innovative concepts that have gone into your TopCon cell, I'm not sure. But, a lot of the patents are just method type patents, and, kind of add ingredient X and you get a slightly better result sort of stuff. So it's all fairly trivial, the amount of the patents that are going in now, and the sheer quantity of them is just bewildering. There's thousands going in a year on basically the same technology. So it's a bit of a shame for the industry, I think, that it's wasting its time in battling there. I think one of the strengths and why the photovoltaic industry has done so well is everyone's gone for a uniform technology, which has allowed the material suppliers to focus on getting the cost out of the material everyone wants, and the equipment suppliers on making gear that everyone's going to buy. So Australian Cadell Evans won the Tour de France once, and in that era, I used to talk a lot about the peloton and pack in terms of the solar industry. Like, you're going to get a breakaway, and but the peloton is going to catch the breakaway eventually if you've got no time limit on the race. And I think that's what happened in solar. Everyone, doing the same thing has been a real cost factor in getting the costs to where we see them now. So it's a shame to see all this bickering about patents that, in most cases are fairly trivial, the issues that are being fought over.
Actually, there is fundamental research in various fields in the PV sector. One thing I also want to point out before I discuss a little bit more in details what we are investigating is that research in PV is always there, and is really the aspect that made the whole difference in why we see PV on such a large scale and so much of our rollout and interest in the public community is because we were able to bring this research directly into the industry, improve the efficiency and decrease the cost of the solar modules. Nowadays, when we are looking into research, I would say we can largely group it into 4 large groups. The first one is advancement of efficiency and technologies of existing or novel and upcoming PV technologies. So, for example, this could be improvements in the typical silicon solar cells that we are using, or upcoming technologies such as perovskites or silicon perovskite tandems. Another aspect that we are seeing that is becoming largely popular in the research community is the whole aspect of sustainability and recycling. And this also comes from the idea that we now have, on a European level, the Critical Raw Materials Act, which basically postulates that there are certain critical raw materials that go into PV that we are kind of limited in using. So it would be very good if we have ways to either reduce their usage, fully substitute them, or find a way to recycle them and then reuse them again and again in modules. And especially the recycling and reusage is still an ongoing research, and a lot of research groups are looking into this. Then we are also having, as a third pillar, I would say, a novel PV concepts or novel PV integration. So up to now, a lot of people, when they think about PV, they simply think about modules installed on roofs. But nowadays, what we are slowly seeing is that we also have development, for example, on vehicle integrated photovoltaics, building integrated photovoltaics, and novel concepts, even like agri-photovoltaics and floating photovoltaics, both of which can substantially also help, like, let's say, for example, working between photovoltaics and agriculture in fields that are currently maybe having problems because of climate change, and it's a very dry area. And the last concept that I also like to mention, and maybe the colleague from KIT can connect here a little bit, is any kind of hybrid systems where PV plays together with any kind of storage or new types of renewables. So for other types of renewables, like wind, for example, but also things like smart grids, digitalization of PV, integration of automated and AI-assisted PV systems, and so on. That's also all part in the research community, as this is also something that needs to be further developed and tested.
Yeah, so it's a very broad
Very
field
broad, indeed.
of search.
I just wanted to underline, to point out that there is still a lot to do, and research can play a really big role.
It really was a great experience bringing you some of these insights and conversations. And thank you very much for watching. Be sure to subscribe here to the Smartery YouTube page and follow the Smartery on LinkedIn and Instagram for updates throughout the year. My name's Jonathan Gifford. I'm the head of content at Climate Copy, and this has been a feature series of the Smarter E podcast. And let's keep powering through and building a resilient energy transition.